Hey everybody, welcome to the Leek. I'm John as always, and we're back for day 2 of the Ikoria Lair of Behemoths set review. Today we're going to be talking about all of the blue cards in the set from a limited perspective. We're talking draft, we're talking sealed, we're not really talking anything else. Keep in mind, of course, that these are my first impressions of the cards. Most of them I have not played with. Of course, some reprints I might have, but this is how I'm going to approach these cards when I first start playing this set. My views might evolve as I play the set. Make sure you check out Spiky Saturday and etc. to get my evolving views once that happens. And finally, of course, these are my opinions. These are my approaches. Your approaches may differ, and I would love to hear them. Set reviews should never, ever be treated as the correct answer. I don't care who is doing the set review. They should be treated as a starting point to talk about the cards and discuss, because Magic is a complex game, and this set is ludicrously complex. But let's get started with the first blue card, Aegis Turtle. Aegis Turtle is a single blue mana for a creature turtle at common. It's an 0/5 with flavor text. That is it. If you have a plan to get to the late game, then this is a blocker that you'll be pretty okay playing. Not only that, but it can serve as a mutate platform later on. I'm not sure if you would want to keep the 0/5 stats, or if you would just want to keep it around as an 0/5 that eventually you're going to put a mutate creature on top of that does something when it mutates. This is a great way to ensure that you're going to have a creature early and around for when you do want to mutate something on top of it. All of that said, I think it is still very narrow. I think there are still probably better cards to play in a vast number of your decks, but if you are very defensive, then this card probably goes slightly up in value. Not a ton, but slightly. This is like a C at best, and some decks probably just don't want it. Up next is Anticipate. Anticipate is a reprint, 1 and a blue for an instant at common. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. I always like Anticipate. 2 mana, instant speed is always nice for this little bit of card selection here. There is a blue-red spells matter deck where this card will be very much at home. And I do think a number of decks will just be very happy about passing the turn, holding up mana, and either casting an instant or sorcery or cycling a card, and Anticipate's going to be at home and all of those spots. That said, it's not an incredible card. You're not picking this first or second or sixth or maybe even 8th pick, but you're going to be pretty happy with probably like one of these in your blue deck. I wouldn't load up on them unless you are blue-red spells, in which case it's fine. But yeah, it's around a C for all of the talking up that I've done. A C for Anticipate. Up next is Archipelagore. Archipelagore is 5 blue for a creature Leviathan at uncommon. It's a 7/7. Whenever this creature mutates, tap up to X target creatures where X is the number of times this creature has mutated. Those creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap step. Mutate for 5 and a blue. So here we have another uncommon mutate card that is cheaper to mutate than it is to cast, and does something when it mutates, and does something based on the number of times the creature has mutated. This card is going to be one of the uncommons that I think just ends the game out of nowhere, because if you do have a creature that you've mutated on once or twice and you slam this down, you suddenly have a 7/7 haste, essentially, because you're turning whatever creature you have that presumably does not have summoning sickness into a 7/7, and you're tapping potentially 3 things if this is the 3rd time that creature's mutated. That's a lot. That's going to leave your opponent pretty defenseless. You're going to be attacking in for 7, perhaps twice if they don't play any more defenses on the following turn. This card's going to end games out of nowhere. If you're casting this for the vanilla cost, I think you've lost. I think it's just significantly worse if you're actually ever going to cast this for 7. But if you're mutating this for 6, and especially if you're mutating it for X equals 2 or 3, I think it's super powerful. I'm gonna have to see how the format plays out, because I think the format speed, I think the existence of our aggro decks will determine whether this is like a B+ or more like a B- C+. So we'll see where it ends up. I'm going to be optimistic, I guess, and go with a B+ for Archipelagore. I think the ability of this to just absolutely end games is going to be large. Up next is Avian Oddity. Avian Oddity is 3 and a blue for a creature bird at uncommon. It's a 2/4 flyer with cycling for 2 and a blue. When you cycle Avian Oddity, put a flying counter on target creature you control. This is the blue of the cycle that cycles and gives its ability to a different creature. So 4 mana for a 2/4 flyer is not something I'm terribly stoked on. That is better than vanilla. Typically that casting cost gets us at 2/4 on the ground, maybe with vigilance, but rarely with flying, I feel. That is a good flying platform for mutate. 3 mana to cycle and give something else flying is not the worst thing in the world if that's what it comes down to. All in all, the card seems totally fine. I don't think it creeps into the B- level, but I'd be pretty okay with this as a C+. Up next is Boon of the Wishgiver. Boon of the Wishgiver is 4 blue for a sorcery at uncommon. Draw 4 cards, cycling for 1 generic mana. This I don't know about. I want to say that it seems good and it will teach people the power of cycling, because if you do draw this late in the game and you have the mana for it, you're going to draw 4 cards, which is huge. But early in the game, you are very, 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 very likely to just cycle this away because you may not reach 6 mana. The issue here is that we saw this card as opportunity. I believe the last time we saw it was M14, where the secret of that draft format was draft opportunity, but that was instant speed. If this was instant speed, where you could hold up that 6 mana, cast at the end of your opponent's turn and draw 4 cards, this card would be bonkers. Being sorcery speed, meaning that you probably have to tap out entirely and not get to use those 4 cards, I think will hurt this a bit. I think it's probably still fine. You definitely don't want to load up on them, although perhaps you can because of cycling. Although I've never been a big fan of that. I don't want to play cards that simply say, pay 1, draw a card 99% of the time. I don't play those cards. I know some people do. I think it's wrong. So I want to know that at least some amount of the time I will be casting this for 6 mana and drawing 4 cards, and that will be impactful and useful. We'll have to see how that plays out. I think it depends on the speed of the format. If this format does have some fast decks in it, this could be too slow. And if it doesn't, then this might just be okay. So again, another variable grade here. It's just way, way, way too hard to tell. So I'm going to put this card at like a C- to perhaps a B-. 4 cards is a lot, but at sorcery speed, no. I can't go above a C+. Up next is Capture Sphere. Capture Sphere is 3 and a blue for an enchantment aura at common. It's got flash, enchant creature. When Capture Sphere enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. We saw this in Guilds of Ravnica, and it was very solid. 4 mana for instant speed removal is extremely good. Yes, it will die to enchantment hate or things like that, but you just can't expect your opponent to have that or be main decking that, even in this format where it's a little bit more acceptable due to the existence of cycling. All in all, this card is relatively first pickable, although it tends to be in weaker packs. 4 mana is a little bit expensive to declare something first pick removal. Generally, Final Death notwithstanding, cards like that. But yeah, this card's just solid. It's around a B, I would say. Maybe because it's an enchantment and it costs 4 mana instead of like 2 for a pacifism or something, we'd want to drop it down a little bit to a B-, but let's go B on Capture Sphere. It's going to be good removal. It's going to be blue removal. You're going to play it and you're going to be happy. Up next is Convolute. Convolute is 2 and a blue for an instant at common. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 4. I've played Convolute more than I feel like I should. 4 mana is just a lot, and it does tend to make this a hard counter spell until extremely late in the game. That said, you don't want to load up on them because drawing this late in the game is really, really, really bad. When your opponent can pay 4 for most of their spells, it's a literal dead card, and it doesn't even have cycling. But in a lot of my blue decks, I tend to be pretty okay with the first Convolute. That said, it's still a pretty low grade. It's still a pretty low pick, around like a C, I would say. A C for Convolute. Up next is Crustacean. Not crustacean, crustacean. It's made of crystals, I guess. 3 and a blue for a creature crab at common. It's a 1/6 with flash. So this is almost like Wishcoin Crab, except instead of a 2/5, we get a 1/6, and it gets a flashy effect. Reminds me, of course, of Riptide Turtle from the last set that was extremely good, but 2 mana flash to block a whole lot of stuff is a lot better than 4 mana flash to block a whole lot of stuff. I think it's probably still fine if your deck is purposely built to utilize this. Either you're a flyer deck and going to go over, or you're a late game deck and you just need ways to block, in which case a Crustacean can be good. In general, I think you're not looking to play Crustacean all that often, but in those specific decks, it will be pretty decent. So this really ranges from like a D+ to a C. And as I said, a lot of grades are going to be variable like this. Magic is just getting more and more complex. This set is pushing the boundaries by far, and it means that grades are becoming more and more and more useless. So remember, focus on the comments, focus on the discussion. The grade is nearly pointless to give to cards. Up next is Dreamtail Heron. Dreamtail Heron is 4 and a blue for a creature elemental bird at common. It's a 3/4 with flying. Whenever this creature mutates, draw a card. Mutate cost of 3 and a blue. That is a very, very, very good mutate cost. If you're playing this as a 5 mana 3/4 flyer, that's kind of mediocre. That's just like Shining Aerosaur and Prized Feldegriffin, etc., which is fine. It's not awful. And it could be it is a very good mutate platform after that, because you're going to have a 3/4 flyer and draw a card. Even better is just playing this on turn 4, turning one of your creatures into a 3/4 flyer and drawing a card immediately. Now, of course, the interesting thing with mutate, and I didn't talk about this too much yesterday, is that mutate is actually a lot more like exploit from Dragons of Tarkir or Fate Reforged, whatever set that was, than it is auras, because you are kind of sacrificing a creature. You are throwing a creature away. You're throwing that creature away underneath this one, and you are getting the ability, but you are turning a potentially wide established board into a very narrow board. So I think there is a bit of push and pull there. There's a little bit of risk to it, because you are essentially sacrificing that creature. It is, for all intents and purposes, going away forever. That's just another complex layer to think about mutate in this set, and it's going to take, I think, a good long while to really get a handle on how and when and how often you should mutate. But Dreamtail Heron looks like a fantastic card to mutate onto something and to mutate onto it. I think it's around a B-. I expect it to be one of the best blue commons. Up next is Escape Protocol. Escape Protocol is 1 and a blue for an enchantment at uncommon. Whenever you cycle a card, you may pay 1 mana. When you do, exile target artifact or creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So I do think that red-white is really where the cycling payoff decks are going to exist. There is a decent amount of cycling in blue, but I don't think the point of blue is to pay off with your cycle. I think the point of cycling in blue is to really help your blue-red spells decks go off and to help you get that card selection. So this payoff just doesn't seem good enough for me. You would need to have a number of very powerful ETB effects for this to really be any good, and I just don't want to waste a spell slot in my deck for a do-nothing enchantment that later on will do maybe still basically nothing unless I do have those good ETB effects. So I think this is basically an F. Keep in mind, of course, that with many Fs, if you have the exact right deck and all 16 of your creatures have good ETB effects and they all happen to also have cycling, then this card would be playable. But in reality, F. Up next is Essence Scatter, a relatively common reprint. Essence Scatter is 1 and a blue for an instant at common. Counter target creature spell. This card is fantastic. Countering creatures is exactly what you want to be doing with your counter spells in limited Magic. The vast majority of non-land cards in opponents' decks will always be creatures, and therefore this will hit a whole lot of things. Be careful, some people do sometimes think about this as being removal. It's not removal, because you have to have this and 2 mana at the exact single window moment that you have to use it. But when you do, and it's not that hard to do that, you will be able to just basically kill that creature or cease it from existing in the first place. Essence Scatter is just very good. It is a relatively high pick. You don't pick it quite as high as you would true removal, but it is still a decently high pick, and you'll play in, I would say, a lot of blue decks. You'll play every copy you can get. So this is like a B-. B- for Essence Scatter. Up next is Facet Reader. Facet Reader is 1 and a blue for a creature human wizard at common. It's a 1/2 with the ability of pay 1 and tap it to draw a card and then discard a card. So you get to loot for 1 mana. It's much better when it's a Merfolk Looter and it's free. You just have to tap the creature, but paying 1 isn't too big of a deal. This also basically gives every single card in your deck cycling 1, which is not too shabby. So yeah, I think this card's actually quite good. I think probably every blue deck's going to be very happy with it, and especially blue-red decks or any sort of control deck is going to be super happy just getting even more card draw and card selection available. So I think this is quite decent. I think it's around the B- range. I don't know that it'll hit top blue common. I think Dreamtail Heron, Essence Scatter are already clogging up that top 3 section. Maybe it could fight for the 3rd best common, but I don't quite think it will beat Capture Sphere either. Up next is Frostlinks, actually another possible top blue common here. Frostlinks is 2 and a blue for a creature elemental cat at common. It's a 2/2. When it ETBs, tap target creature an opponent controls. That creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Frostlynx has basically always been good. Be aware you don't actually play this in your controlling deck, because controlling decks don't want to tap down a creature for a turn. They want to kill them or tap them down forever. You actually play this more in a tempo deck, a deck where you are trying to upset your opponent's tempo in order to get your damage through and win. And this does a very, very good job at that, especially because it attacks for 2, hopefully, on the next turn. As well, this is actually a pretty decent mutate target, I think. Talking about the exploit idea, the idea that you're actually sacrificing a creature when you do cast your mutate on top of it. In this case, we have a 2/2 that has already done the majority of what it's going to do by the time it's hit the battlefield. That makes this a creature that you'd be pretty happy to mutate on with any of the mutate creatures that do something when they mutate. So keep that in mind. And again, mutate's just going to be super complex to get our heads around. I think thinking about it from the idea of sacrificing a creature is a good start. But Frostlynx is great. I think it's around a B. It's just a very good card. A truly weak pack, it would probably be the first pick. Up next is Frostveil Ambush. Frostveil Ambush is 3 blue for an instant at common. Tap up to 2 target creatures. Those creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap step, cycling for 1. This is really, really, really expensive for what it does. 5 mana instant speed to do this, but that is a powerful effect. Some board states, especially if your opponent is spending a bit too much time mutating onto one creature, this could just be sleep. And cycling makes it significantly better, especially with a single mana to cycle it. So this card is ultimately probably a totally fine C+. I think I would play the first copy maybe not 100% of the time, just because I think there are some decks where, like Frostlynx, tapping creatures down for a turn, or 2 full turn cycles, I suppose, is not incredible. But I think you'd still play this in the majority of blue decks, at least the first copy. Second copy, third copy, I don't know. I get that the cycling makes this quote-unquote free, but I don't feel like you're ever struggling for playables in modern sets, so I don't think you have to think about playing 3 cards that say pay 1, draw a card. You typically have other stuff you can play. First one, though, I like C+ for Frostveil Ambush. Up next is Glimmerbell. Glimmerbell is 1 and a blue for a creature elemental jellyfish at common. It's a 1/3 with flying. Pay 1 and a blue, untap Glimmerbell. Of course, this doesn't do anything by itself. It flies in for 1, which is not bad. 1/3 for 2 is pretty decent. I always, or historically used to anyways, I've learned, undervalued 1/2 flyers for 2 that did something. Well, 1/3 flyers for 2 that do something must be even better, right? This, of course, is a great mutate platform. 1 and a blue to untap something that you've mutated seems pretty decent. There is a mutate pinger that we'll talk about in a couple of days in red. So there are some ways that you could probably go deep on this. If you don't have ways to abuse this, it's still okay. You can give something pseudo-vigilance if you've mutated onto the Glimmerbell, but I would be careful. I think this, again, is going to range heavily depending on what your plans are with it, from around a C to a B- still seems too high. A C or a C+ for Glimmerbell. Up next is Gust of Wind. Gust of Wind is 3 and a blue for a sorcery at common. This spell costs 2 less to cast. If you control a creature with flying, return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. Draw a card. 4 mana, sorcery speed, bounce. Isn't my favorite thing. It does hit anything other than land, so you can hit enchantments or artifacts if need be. It does draw a card, and if we do have a flyer, and we're in one of the flying colors, then it is only 2 mana. This all makes it probably okay. Now, people do tend to undervalue sorcery speed bounce a little bit too much, and there's often a reason why it's sorcery speed. It's so that blowouts don't happen too much. And of course, in this set with Mutate, they don't want blowouts to happen too much. Being able to bounce a big mutate stack, though, plus draw a card to replace itself seems pretty decent to me. I think the first one of these is going to be good in every blue deck. If you do have a bunch of flyers, I think I'd be very happy with the second one. Beyond that, I don't know if I want to go too much higher. It is expensive if you're not getting that discount, even though it does replace itself. But I'm going to keep Gust of Wind at like a strong C+. Yeah, let's go strong C+ for Gust of Wind. Up next is Hampering Snare. Hampering Snare is 1 and a blue for an instant at common. Creatures your opponents control get -2/-0 until end of turn, cycling for 2. This is another of the cycling cards that I think you can play if you're desperate for a playable, and if you're not, there's probably just better stuff. -2/-0 to your opponent's team. might do something, but it might also just not do enough. It depends on how big your opponent's team is. I would much prefer something like Hysterical Blindness from original Innistrad, which was -4/-0 for, I'm gonna say it was 3 mana, I think, but the cycling does make it a little bit better. Still, I think it's very 23rd card, and I'm going to keep it at a C-. Cut it when you can, and if you can't, well, it's not a big deal. Keep Safe is 1 and a blue for an instant at common. Counter target spell that targets a permanent you control. Draw a card. I've never liked this effect. We had it as Turnicide in Eldritch Moon. There's just so few scenarios where this works out, and it does draw a card, but it does not cycle. You have to be able to cast this spell in order to get that card draw cantrip. The problem here, as I've mentioned before, is that most decks in Limited are creatures. You know, you're typically looking at 14, 15, 16, maybe even 17 creatures in a deck. The rest of the cards are typically reserved for removal, or maybe auras, or maybe enchantments, or artifacts, or things like that, and they don't necessarily all target permanents that I control. So my opponent has probably just less than a handful of cards that this spell would even affect, and I have to have this spell in my hand with the mana up at the exact moment that it happens. It's just very narrow, and I don't want to give a card slot up for this card. I'll keep an eye on it because, of course, Mutate, perhaps you just desperately need to protect that creature, and so you play this just because. But I'm going to start out not playing this card. I don't really like it. It feels too narrow to me, so I'm going to keep it at a D+ to start. Up next is Mystic Subdual. Mystic Subdual is 1 and a blue for an enchantment aura at uncommon. It's got flash, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets -2/-0 and loses all ability. Well, this is very far from Chant of the Skiff Sang. -2/-0 is just not that exciting. Losing all of its abilities, well, that might be better, but I don't know. This just doesn't feel impactful enough for me. It's probably okay. It's probably fine. It's not going to be premier removal. I wouldn't treat it as removal. And it almost feels a little bit sideboardy to me. If you see your opponent has some very scary creature abilities, or perhaps they're mutating to make one creature with a whole bunch of scary abilities, perhaps you side it in. I don't know if I actually want to main deck this. I think the first one's probably okay, and you treat it as like kill a random 2/2, quote unquote kill. But other than that, I'm not stoked by Mystic Subdual. So let's keep it at like maybe a C, I guess. A C for Mystic Subdual. It reads like removal, but I don't think it's going to function like removal. Up next is Mythos of Illuna. Mythos of Illuna is 2 blue for a sorcery at rare. Create a token that's a copy of target permanent. If red-green was spent to cast this spell, instead create a token that's a copy of the permanent, except the token has when this permanent enters the battlefield. If it's a creature, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. 2 blue to clone is totally solid. Obviously, it gets much better the better your deck is, or the better your opponent's deck is, because this does copy anybody's permanent. But clones are just always pretty decent, especially for 3 mana. If you were unaware, keep in mind that with Mutate Stack, that is 1 creature, so if you do copy a mutated stack, it copies the entire stack and creates 1 creature. So do keep that in mind, with, of course, the top creature being the casting cost, power and toughness, etc. If you do pay red-green, so you pay red-green, blue, and you make this into something that fights when it comes in, that's even better. But this card was already around like a strong B to perhaps a B+, and I think if you do happen to be Teamer or have the ability to pay Teamer for this, then it moves on up into the A- or even A range, perhaps just A-, because you do, or your opponent has to have a creature that will be big enough to do what you want to do with that fight. So let's go B+ for Mythos of Illuna. Up next is Neutralize. Neutralize is 1 blue for an instant at uncommon. Counter target spell, cycling 2. This is the best cancel we've ever seen. Cancel is typically a card that you don't super want to play in your draft decks, but you sometimes play in your sealed decks. The reason for that is sealed is often a little bit slower, and everybody opened 6 packs, which means everybody has at least 6 rares in their pool. In draft, everybody opened 3 packs. Sure, some people might have gotten past a bunch of rares, but that means other people will have no rares. So there's just more bombs and sealed, so you do play clunkier counterspells. This counterspell, however, is not remotely clunky. If you're having issues getting that blue, you can just pay 2 and cycle this away. If you're late game and a counterspell is just not going to do it and you need something to finish the game instead, cycle this away. Very flexible, very useful. I think it's going to be a pretty solid card in this set. I think I still like Essence Scatter just a tinch more for being 1 in a blue, even though it's narrower and doesn't cycle, but I think this is right up there. Let's go with a strong C+, or do I want to go B-? Let's go B- for Neutralize. Up next is Of One Mind. Of One Mind is 2 in a blue for a sorcery at common. This spell costs 2 less to cast if you control a human creature and a non-human creature. Draw 2 cards. So Divination was just made completely obsolete because this is Divination with an option of being cheaper. If the format is slow, which we'll see, then Divination is A-OK, and if it only costs 1 mana sometimes, then this is super awesome. If the format is fast, I doubt it, although we did see that super hasty flyer, sort of hasty flyer yesterday, and there are things that would suggest to me that aggro decks might blow some people out here. Then this would be less good, but I'm going to start out thinking that this card is pretty darn good, 100% playable just for being a Divination, and then if you do get the human, non-human thing and you only pay 1 mana for this, it's going to be even better. I'm going to go for a strong C+ with Of One Mind, and boy do I want this in every single blue-red spells deck I play. Up next is Ominous Seas. Ominous Seas is 1 in a blue for an enchantment at uncommon. Whenever you draw a card, put a Foreshadow counter on Ominous Seas. Remove 8 Foreshadow counters from Ominous Seas. Create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token, cycling for 2 generic mana. This card seems pretty darn good. Keep in mind that this is draw a card, not cycle. It's obviously built for cycling, but it will get a counter every single turn just by you drawing your natural card for that turn, which means this is an 8-turn clock before you're just going to magically have an 8/8 Kraken. Now, if you are cycling, if you are casting Of One Mind, if you are looting, if you are doing that 8/8 Kraken may come even faster. Now, that 8/8 Kraken, unlike the one from Theros Beyond Death, does not have hexproof, which means it can get bounced, it can get pacified, it can get killed, it can get horribly, horribly maimed, but you don't sacrifice Ominous Seas. So if you can somehow draw 16 cards in a game, then you could get a second 8/8 Kraken. You'll also be starting to get in danger of milling yourself at that point. So, you know, be careful. Still, I think the upside on this is good. The opportunity cost of putting this in your deck and paying 2 mana is relatively low, and it's even lower because if you do draw this late in the game where you're just not going to get up to 8 counters on it, you can just cycle it away instead of casting it and draw a card. So Ominous Seas looks pretty darn good to me. It's going to be, again, deck dependent. This is a card that's going to vary from you should not play it to it's going to be a fantastic card. In the deck that it goes in, I think it's going to be like a B-, I think. The trick here is, of course, is that it literally does nothing until it does something, which does make me hesitate slightly, but let's go B-, assuming it's in the right deck. Up next is Phase Dolphin. Phase Dolphin is 2 in a blue for a creature elemental whale at common. It's a 1/4. Whenever Phase Dolphin attacks, another target attacking creature can't be blocked this turn. This seems like it really wants to be a Pegasus Courser. It's a little tougher, but it doesn't fly, but it makes the friend creature completely unblockable instead of just giving it flying. Seems like this could close out some games, but it won't be quite as guaranteed long-term value as Courser was, since it's not too hard for your opponent to double block and kill a 1/4. Seems like a C+ still. I think it's going to be like a weakish C+ depending on the deck. Of course, if you do pair this with like an 11/11 or something, well, that's the end of the game now, isn't it? So let's go C+ for Phasing Dolphin. Up next is Polywog Symbiote. Polywog Symbiote is 1 in a blue for a creature frog at uncommon. It's a 1/3. Each creature spell you cast costs 1 less to cast if it has Mutate. Whenever you cast a creature spell, if it has Mutate, draw a card, then discard a card. Now, do note that this doesn't care if you're mutating or not. It cares if it has Mutate. So if you cast your creature that has Mutate as a vanilla creature, it still costs 1 less and you still get to loot. This card seems fantastic if you are in a deck that is going to have a whole bunch of Mutate. It looks like Mutate.deck is a number of colors, but I think blue-green is one of the big ones. And this card's going to be super happy. If you do have a critical threshold of Mutate, I'm guessing at least 5-ish or 6-ish, this card's going to be incredible as long as it comes down a little bit early. The one slight problem here is that if you do top deck this late, it doesn't have cycling, it doesn't have ways of generating more value after you've gone through your mutate creatures, etc. So it is a good build around, but you still do have to draw it at the right time. So I'm going to go with like a B-, I think, for Polywog Symbiote. Obviously, some games it's going to play like an A- when you do play this on turn 2 and you just go mutate creature, whether you're mutating or casting, whatever you're doing with them. But yeah, let's go with a B- for Polywog Symbiote. Up next is Pouncing Shore Shark. Pouncing Shore Shark is terrifying. It's 4 and a blue for a creature shark beast at uncommon. It's a 4/3 with flash. Whenever this creature mutates, you may return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. Mutate for 3 and a blue. That's right, 4 mana, instant speed, bounce, and you get a 4/3, assuming that you have a creature that you can quote-unquote sacrifice to it. That's not that big of an ask in this format. And if you're quote-unquote sacking a 1/1 or a 1/2 or some little cruddy creature that's not really doing anything, and you're bouncing a creature of theirs at instant speeds, it could just be fantastic. I think this card's going to be a relatively high pick. There is the downside on all these cards, that if you don't have a creature and you have to cast this for 5, you're not going to feel great. I guess a 5 mana flash 4/3 is still okay, but boy, the fail state on some of these mutate cards is harsh. So I guess you just have to accept that if that happens, you've lost the game, give up, move on to the next game, which is unfortunate. I prefer games of Magic where you can kind of get back in if you stumble a little bit. I've said this before in a lot of videos, I like Magic to be a game of inches, and I feel like Magic is becoming a game of Hail Marys. It's becoming a game of curve out, get lucky, don't not curve out, don't not get lucky. So get lucky. Let's give a B to Pouncing Shore Shark, assuming you get lucky. Up next is Reconnaissance Mission. Reconnaissance Mission is 2 blue for an enchantment at uncommon. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card, cycling for 2 generic mana. I don't really like this. It's 4 mana. Ominous Seas, for example, was 2 mana. That's a much lower opportunity cost. Reconnaissance Mission costing 4 mana is a little bit harder. You have to be absolutely chock full of flyers or unblockable or, I guess, phasing dolphins or something. Some way of guaranteeing that your creatures are going to be getting these curiosity triggers going regularly. If you can't guarantee that, then this card is a really bad card. If you can guarantee that, this card gets a little bit better. I'm still a little bit hesitant about putting 4 mana. That's probably going to be an entire turn into playing this card. If I can draw a card that turn, maybe it is fine. We'll have to see. This is an extremely deck dependent card. Extremely. There are going to be games where or decks where this is an F. There are going to be decks where this is like a B-, we'll say, maybe a strong C+. Cycling does help out, because if you do play this late or you just don't have the flyers or whatever, you can at least turn it into another card. So let's go C+ for Reconnaissance Mission if it's the right deck. If it's not, it's an F. Up next is Sea Dasher Octopus. Sea Dasher Octopus is 1 blue for a creature octopus at rare. It's a 2/2 with flash. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Why does it have flash? Well, it has flash because it has mutate. Your creature's coming in, your opponent didn't block it, well, pay 1 and a blue and put this octopus on top or on the bottom, whatever you want, and now you also get to draw a card in addition to dealing whatever that damage was that you're doing. This is very good. It feels like ninjutsu or something. Yeah, just a super good card. It's not a bomb. I'm not going to put this in the A range or anything. It's going to be in the B range, but I think this card's very good and probably going to be the first pick in a number of packs. Perhaps if you're being super competitive, you would take unconditional great removal over this, but other than that, I think this is a very strong first pick. I've got this at a B+. I think it's going to be really good. Up next is Shark Typhoon. Shark Typhoon is 5 and a blue for an enchantment at rare. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create an XX blue shark creature token with flying, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. Cycling for X, 1 and a blue, which is kind of weird, but it has that X because when you cycle Shark Typhoon, create an XX blue shark creature token with flying. So for an enchantment that costs 6 mana, I'm already kind of out. I need to be making like 5/5 worms every turn or something to really want to play an enchantment that's that big. Maybe making XX flying sharks, only if I'm casting non-creature spells, is iffy, really iffy for me. I don't know. The cycling is nice because it has that safety valve of, I'm not getting to 6 mana. Let's at least make 1 shark and draw a card and get the heck out of here. And that safety valve probably keeps it in the totally okay range. I think I'm okay with 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer that draws me a card. That's not the worst card I've ever played. But then if I find myself getting towards 6 mana, and I can play this for 6 mana, and I am in probably blue-red, the spells matter deck, so I'm going to be casting non-creature spells and getting XX Sharks, it's probably fine. So I think cycling saves this. If cycling was not on this card, I think I'd probably just say, nope, I'm not in it. Even though it is a payoff for blue-red, it's too late in the game. But because you can just get that shark if you need to, if you're not getting to it, I think this card still stays as like a B for the blue-red spells deck. If you're not flush with spells, this is like a filler flyer. Up next is Startling Development. Startling Development is 1 and a blue for an instant at common. Until end of turn, target creature becomes a blue serpent with base power and toughness 4/4, cycling for 1 generic mana. So this is probably a combat trick. I guess technically if your opponent's coming in with something really frightening, you could shrink it, quote unquote, to a 4/4, but really you're probably going to be using this on your like 1/1 flyer or something and saying, haha, surprise, it was a giant growth all along. And then if it's not relevant, you can just cycle it away for 1 mana, which is totally fine. So this card seems like a fine sort of combat trick, as it were. I think it's in that sort of 23rd combat trick slot where if you are lacking a playable, this is fine, and if you have better cards, get rid of it. So a C for Startling Development. Up next is Thieving Otter. Thieving Otter is 2 and a blue for a creature otter at common. It's a 2/2. Whenever Thieving Otter deals damage, not combat damage, which is interesting, to an opponent, draw a card. This card seems very good. 3 mana for a 2/2 that can Curiosity your opponent is decent. If your opponent has stumbled and you get in for 2, awesome. You get to draw yourself a card. Obviously, this is going to be a pretty decent mutate platform because that ability attached to a flyer is going to be great. That ability attached to an unblockable is going to be great. That ability attached to the pinger is interesting. I believe the pinger only hits creatures, unfortunately, but if you can somehow make this Thieving Otter ping an opponent and draw a card, that's going to be huge as well. I think this card has a lot of versatility. I think it's very good. I think it's a strong C+. I don't think we jump up to a B minus because we do have to get something mutated onto this probably to guarantee that we're getting in for that damage. But it is going to be one of the just another of these cards that snowballs away with a game when your opponent stumbles. If your opponent misses like a 2-drop and a 3-drop and you just start hitting them and drawing cards, you're going to outvalue them like crazy. Up next is Voracious Great Shark. Voracious Great Shark is 3 blue for a creature shark at rare. It's a 5/4 with flash. When Voracious Great Shark enters the battlefield, counter target artifact or creature spell. 5 mana for a counter spell is a little bit much. I feel like when we've seen that in the past, we've gotten such good things as draw a card, whereas now we get a 5/4, which is really good. This creature's totally fine as a 5/4 flash for 5. You'll be happy with a big dumb creature like that that's going to probably act like in combat removal most of the time, and if you do happen to get to counter a spell with it as well, that's just going to be gravy. I think this card's totally fine. It's like a B minus. I think it's not a pull into blue for me exactly. It's not a card that I'm going to open in the rare slot and be like, oh wow, we got there, but it's probably going to be the first pick in some packs that are lacking like unconditional removal. B minus for Voracious Great Shark. Our second last blue card is Wingfold Terran. Wingfold Terran is 5 and a blue for a creature dinosaur at common. It's a 3/6. When it ETBs, you get your choice of a flying counter or a friggin' hexproof counter. Yep, here we go. Here's what we were afraid of in the set where you're going to be putting things on things and gambling against your opponent blowing you out. Here's a hexproof counter at common. Luckily, this card does cost 6 mana, so the odds are unlikely that you're going to be casting this and then spending several turns mutating on it. 6 mana is the wrong side. You will probably have mutated a bunch by the time this comes down, so hopefully that keeps things in check. 3/6 is kind of an obnoxious body to have hexproof on it anyways, and if you don't need that hexproof, you can fly with it. Ultimately, I think and I hope that this card's just not going to be that good. I hope that the designers saw that hexproof would be a problem in the set and costed this very, very expensively. So I'm going to start this at like a C, maybe even a C minus. I think 6 is just very expensive. But if 6 is not expensive, then this format's not going to be good. period. So let's start at a C-. Let's hope it's a C- for Wingfold Terran. Our last card today is Wingspan Mentor. Wingspan Mentor is 2 and a blue for a creature human wizard at uncommon. She's a 1/3. When Wingspan Mentor enters the battlefield, put a flying counter on target non-human creature you control. Pay 2 and a blue, tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with flying. This looks really good because unlike the Vigilance one, double the cards have flying in this set, or could get flying, or give flying, or mention flying in some way. So I think that this card has the potential to massively snowball, and I think there's enough cards to also build around it to take this relatively early and say, okay, if the card flies, I am taking it, which is often a decent suggestion anyways. 2 and a blue to give +1/+1 counters to at least one creature, because she came down and put a counter on either herself or somebody else, and then potentially getting even more counters every time you do it is going to be fantastic. I think this is going to be a huge build around, and I think it's going to be a terrifying build around as well. 3 mana for even one counter I think would be okay. 3 mana if you're getting more is going to be nutty. I think this is a strong B build around. If you do whiff on getting flying creatures, she does drop quite a bit, but let's say she's a B if you have that threshold of flyers. So that's going to wrap it up for blue. Blue looks pretty good. I think there's at least 4 or 5 or 6 cards at the common slot that I'm trying to figure out which would be the top 3, and they're all kind of fighting for it. In the rare slots, we don't quite have anything like the Luminous Broodmoth, at least, but we do have still some scary stuff. Let me know what you think of the cards in the comments down below, what cards you agree with, disagree with, are excited to play, and etc. As always, if you do have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me over on Twitter, Facebook, and Twitch, especially Twitch next Wednesday, or this Wednesday, I suppose, where I will be playing Ikoria 1 day early. Thanks to Wizards for inviting me to that, giving me a stocked account. We're going to jam sealed and perhaps some draft all day long on Arena, so check that out. You can always go over to patreon.com/ShamanAleek if you want to help the channel out. That way, anything helps out. Patrons absolutely are what is keeping this channel going, so thank you very much to them. You get to hang out in the Patreon Discord where we share our thoughts on Magic cards and Magic formats and much more frequently on other games and beer and food. You can also work your way towards getting a Mana Leak playmat, getting your name in for the draw each week to get the cards out of the Crack-a-Pack Tuesdays, or Pack One Pick One as they're now called. And of course, the easiest way to help out is just to like, share, and subscribe. That significantly helps the channel out. But if you do have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all next time.